"You're not invited. Laura doesn't want you there," my family texted coldly after I funded their entire wedding. "Then pay for IT yourselves, leeches," I snapped, while canceling everything and deleting 55 files. "Now pay your own bill." I'm Madison, 33, a software developer who's always been the responsible one in my family. 3 weeks before my sister Laura's wedding, a wedding I'd already poured $25,000 into, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "You're not invited. Laura doesn't want you there." My stomach dropped as I stared at those cold words. After funding the venue, catering, photography, and more, I was being cut from the guest list by my own sister. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife possibly could. Before I dive into this painful story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever dealt with ungrateful family members who took advantage of your generosity. Trust me, you'll want to see how I handled these leeches. Growing up in Portland, our family wasn't poor, but we weren't exactly comfortable either. My parents, Diane and Robert, worked hard, mom as a nurse and dad as a high school teacher, but raising 2 daughters on their salaries meant cutting corners. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood, but was never part of our vocabulary. From childhood, the dynamic between Laura and me was clear. I was the responsible one, the achiever, the reliable daughter who helped with chores without being asked. Laura, 2 years younger, was the family princess. While I was expected to excel in school, help around the house, and generally act like a mini adult, Laura was allowed to focus on being social and finding herself. "Madison will figure it out" became my parents' mantra whenever something needed handling, whether it was filing taxes for my part-time job or navigating college applications alone. Meanwhile, Laura got personalized guidance for everything from homework to picking out prom dresses. Despite this imbalance, I thrived academically. I graduated valedictorian and earned a full scholarship to study computer science at University of Washington. College was liberating. Finally, my hard work was recognized on its own merits. I graduated summa cum laude and landed a job at a promising tech startup in Seattle. The startup life was grueling but exhilarating. While my peers bought fancy cars or downtown condos with their big paychecks, I lived frugally in a shared apartment, investing most of my salary in stock options. When our company was acquired 3 years later, my prudence paid off spectacularly. At 28, I suddenly had a net worth of over $2 million. Success didn't change my modest lifestyle much. I upgraded to a comfortable 1-bedroom condo, took one amazing solo trip to Japan, and set up solid retirement accounts. What had changed was my family's perception of me. Suddenly, I wasn't just reliable Madison, I was wealthy Madison, a potential solution to everyone's financial problems. It started small. Dad needed a new car after his ancient Honda finally died. I helped with the down payment. Mom's hospital restructured, cutting her hours. I covered the mortgage for 3 months. Laura needed to move after a breakup. I paid her security deposit and month's rent. Each time, the gratitude seemed sincere, if somewhat entitled. When Laura met James at a friend's wedding, the family dynamic shifted again. James came from money, old East Coast money with summer homes and country club memberships. Suddenly, Laura was spending weekends in the Hamptons and posting Instagram photos from charity galas. The princess had found her prince, and my parents were ecstatic. The engagement announcement came after just 8 months of dating. Laura called me, squealing about the 2-carat diamond and perfect proposal at sunset on a yacht. I was genuinely happy for her, despite the nagging feeling that James seemed more impressed with Laura's carefully curated social media presence than her actual personality. "Madison, I'm so excited for you to be part of this," Laura gushed over the phone. "You've always been there for me, and I want you right by my side." When she mentioned the wedding would be at the Griffin Estate, one of Seattle's most exclusive venues, I felt the twinge of concern. Griffin Estate weddings started at $50,000, far beyond what our parents could afford. "Don't worry about Mom and Dad," Laura said before I could voice my concern. "James's parents are helping, and we've got it covered." She paused, then added casually, "Though, if you wanted to help with some of the smaller expenses, that would be amazing." "Of course," I replied, thinking she meant the rehearsal dinner or perhaps her dress. "I'd be happy to help with some of the wedding expenses." I had no idea that some expenses would soon become the entire wedding, or that my generosity would ultimately get me uninvited from the very event I was funding. What started as some expenses quickly snowballed into a financial avalanche. 2 weeks after the engagement, Laura invited me to lunch at an upscale restaurant I knew she couldn't afford. Over $60 entrees, which I paid for, she slid a wedding budget spreadsheet across the table. "So this is what we're thinking," she said, pointing to the bottom line, $120,000. I nearly choked on my sparkling water. "Laura, that's a lot." "It's actually pretty reasonable for what we want," she countered, flipping through a wedding magazine showing elaborate floral arrangements and custom-made table settings. "The Griffin estate is $25,000 just for the venue rental, but it's the only place that will give us the fairy tale vibe we're going for." I asked the obvious question, what are James's parents contributing? Laura's smile faltered. "Well, that's the thing. They're not exactly on board with the wedding yet. They think we're rushing things and wanted us to have a longer engagement." She fidgeted with her napkin. "They said they might help later, but for now, we're on our own." "And Mom and Dad?" "They're putting in $10,000, which is all they can afford." Her eyes welled with tears. "Madison, I know it's a lot to ask, but this is my one special day. James is perfect, and I want everything to be perfect for him. His friends all had amazing weddings, and I can't show up with something basic." I should have said no. I should have suggested reasonable budget or a longer engagement to save up. Instead, I heard myself say, "I can cover the venue deposit while you figure out the rest." Laura's tears vanished instantly, replaced by a dazzling smile. "You're the best sister ever. I knew I could count on you." That $25,000 deposit for the venue, catering, and photography was just the beginning. Over the next few months, the requests kept coming, each presented as a crisis that only I could solve. "The florist needs a 50% deposit by Friday or we'll lose our date." "The designer dress I fell in love with is being discontinued next month." "The band James wanted just had a cancellation on our date, but we need to book them immediately." Each time I transferred the money, telling myself it was an investment in my sister's happiness. I created detailed spreadsheets tracking every expense, naively believing Laura and James would eventually reimburse at least part of it. By 3 months before the wedding, I had spent over $75,000, and the bills kept coming. My parents, rather than acting as a voice of reason, seemed to encourage Laura's extravagance. "You're so blessed to be able to do this for your sister," my mother said during one of our weekly calls. "Your father and I could never give her the wedding she deserves." The subtle implication was clear. As the financially successful sibling, it was my duty to provide what they couldn't. No one seemed to consider that I had worked incredibly hard for my money, or that I might have my own plans for it. Laura's attitude shifted from grateful to entitled with alarming speed. What began as "thank you so much for helping us" became "we need another $5,000 for upgraded linens," without so much as a please. James, who supposedly came from money, was conspicuously absent from all financial discussions. One evening, after transferring another $3,000 for a premium open bar package, I finally asked Laura directly about James's contribution. "He's contributing in other ways," she said defensively. "He's handling all the honeymoon arrangements." Later, I discovered through an accidental email that James's parents were paying for the honeymoon, a 2-week stay at a luxury resort in Bali. James wasn't contributing a dime. By the 2-month mark, I had spent nearly $95,000 on my sister's wedding. My financial advisor had stopped sending subtle warnings and was now directly questioning my decisions. I'd had to liquidate some investments, incurring tax penalties I hadn't planned for, but every time I considered pulling back, I thought of the disappointment on Laura's face, the accusations of ruining her special day, the family drama that would ensue. So I kept paying, buried my resentment, and told myself that after the wedding, things would return to normal. Little did I know that normal for my family meant taking advantage of my generosity until I had nothing left to give, emotionally or financially. Despite funding virtually the entire wedding, I found myself increasingly sidelined in the planning process. My demanding job as a senior developer meant I couldn't attend every cake tasting arrangement viewing, but I made efforts to join important decisions via FaceTime, or by rearranging my schedule when possible. Laura, however, seemed to deliberately schedule appointments when I was in unmovable meetings or presentations. "Oh, did I get the time wrong?" she'd say innocently. "We've already put down the deposit anyway, so it doesn't really matter." One Tuesday evening, I left work early to surprise Laura at a menu tasting I wasn't originally able to attend. When I arrived at the venue, I found her already there with our mother and James's mother, Patricia, a thin, elegant woman with perfectly highlighted hair and a perpetual expression of mild disapproval. "Madison?" Laura exclaimed, looking more startled than pleased. "What are you doing here?" "My last meeting canceled, so I thought I'd join after all," I explained, already sensing I'd made a mistake. Patricia gave me a cool once-over, taking in my simple work attire. "Laura didn't mention you'd be joining us." "It was a last-minute decision," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Madison, Laura's sister." "Yes," Patricia replied, barely touching my fingers. "Laura's mentioned you work in computers, was it?" Before I could respond, Laura jumped in. "Madison's just super busy with her job, so she usually can't make these things. Mom and I have been handling most of the details." Throughout the tasting, I was treated like an intruder rather than the person paying for the entire event. Patricia dominated the conversation, vetoing menu items as too pedestrian, and suggesting expensive upgrades that I knew would eventually land on my credit card. Laura deferred to her future mother-in-law on everything, while our mother nodded along enthusiastically. After Patricia left, I pulled Laura aside. "What was that about?" I felt like I was someone else's wedding planning. "Don't be dramatic," Laura sighed. "Patricia has amazing taste, and she's done this before with James's older sisters. I want her to feel included. More included than the person paying for everything?" I couldn't help asking. Laura's face hardened. "Is that what this is about? The money? Are you going to hold that over my head forever?" Our mother intervened before I could respond. "Girls, please. Madison, your sister is under a lot of stress. The last thing she needs is to feel guilty about accepting your help." I apologized, as I always did, and the moment passed. But the pattern continued. A week later, while grabbing coffee near Laura's apartment, I overheard her voice from a corner table. She was with her maid of honor, Kimberly, speaking loudly enough that her words carried clearly. "Madison's being such a control freak about everything," Laura complained. "Just because she's paying, doesn't mean she gets to make all the decisions. It's my wedding, not hers." "That sucks," Kimberly sympathized. "But at least you're getting the dream wedding without going into debt. Small price to pay for her attitude, I guess." Laura sighed. "Sometimes I wish she would just send the money and stay out of it. She's making everything so complicated with her spreadsheets and questions." I left before they could spot me, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. The spreadsheets she complained about were my attempt to stay organized and ensure nothing fell through the cracks, a courtesy to her, not a control tactic. The final red flag came 3 weeks before the wedding. Laura had organized a bridal party spa day as a thank you to her bridesmaids, though I wasn't officially in the bridal party. Laura had claimed she didn't want to burden me with extra responsibilities. Given how much I was already doing, I assumed I'd be included in the pre-wedding celebration. I found out about the spa day from my cousin Rachel's Instagram story. A photo of Laura and 6 other women in plush robes, champagne flutes in hand, with the caption "Spoiling our bride-to-be." #Laura and James tie the knot. When I confronted Laura that evening, she broke down in tears. "I didn't think you'd want to come. You're always so busy and stressed about work." I was trying to be considerate. "By excluding me from a day celebrating your wedding? The wedding I'm paying for." My voice shook with hurt and anger. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I've been so overwhelmed with everything." "You're right. I should have invited you. I'll make it up to you, I promise. You're the most important person in this whole process, and I couldn't do any of this without you." Her apologies seemed sincere, and for a few days, things improved. Laura called daily with updates, asked my opinion on last-minute details, and even scheduled a sisters-only dinner at my favorite restaurant. I began to think I'd overreacted, that the stress of wedding planning had temporarily strained our relationship, but everything would be fine. Then came the rehearsal dinner. James's parents had finally agreed to cover this event, hosting it at an exclusive country club. Meeting James's extended family and friends was illuminating in all the wrong ways. His college roommates, all working in finance or law, made subtle digs about the tech industry being overvalued and full of lucky coding monkeys who stumbled into money. More concerning was how Laura presented herself to James's circle. Gone was my slightly awkward, sometimes funny sister who'd once dreamed of teaching elementary school. In her place was a polished, name-dropping stranger who claimed to run her own successful lifestyle consulting business. A dramatic overstatement of the Instagram account where she occasionally posted sponsored content for free products. When James's uncle asked how we'd managed to afford such an extravagant wedding on a teacher's salary, "What our father did," Laura smoothly replied. "Madison and I have been quite successful in our careers, as if we were equal contributors to the wedding fund." Later, I overheard Patricia telling another guest, "Laura comes from a good family. Her sister made some money in that tech bubble, nothing like our family businesses, of course, but they're comfortable." I felt sick. Not only was Laura taking credit for my financial contribution, but she was also minimizing my hard-earned success to fit into James's world. When I tried to talk to her about it after the dinner, she dismissed my concerns. "I was just trying to fit in, Madison. James's family can be judgmental, and I didn't want them looking down on us. By lying about your non-existent business and taking credit for my money? Don't be so sensitive," she snapped. "It's not like I told them you're paying for everything. That would be humiliating for everyone." I went home that night with a growing sense of dread. Something felt very wrong about the entire situation, but I was in too deep to pull out now. The wedding was less than a week away. All I had to do was get through the ceremony, smile for the photos, and then I could start setting better boundaries with my sister and my family. Or so I thought, until the text message that changed everything. The message arrived during a critical product meeting. As lead developer on our company's newest security feature, I was in the middle of presenting implementation timelines to our executive team when my phone buzzed repeatedly on the conference table. Normally, I would never check messages during such an important meeting, but the multiple notifications suggested an emergency. Excusing myself briefly, I glanced at my screen and froze. 3 messages from my mother. "Madison, we need to talk about the wedding. There's been a change of plans. You're not invited. Laura doesn't want you there." I must have made some sort of sound because several colleagues looked up with concern. Mumbling something about a family emergency, I fled to the nearest bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and read the rest of the incoming messages with trembling hands. "Laura feels you've been too controlling about wedding plans. She says you're making everything about yourself and your contribution. James's parents have offered to help with some expenses, but only if the wedding proceeds without drama." The final blow came in the last message. "Laura needs this day to be perfect. Please understand and respect her wishes." Respect her wishes? After I'd poured nearly $100,000 into her perfect day, after I'd endured months of increasing entitlement, subtle insults and exclusion, my vision blurred with tears of rage and humiliation, I called my mother immediately, struggling to keep my voice steady. "What exactly is going on?" "Madison," she sighed, as if I were being difficult. "I know this is upsetting, but Laura is under tremendous pressure. James's parents are finally warming up to the marriage, and she can't risk anything going wrong." "And I'm something that could go wrong?" I asked incredulously. There was a telling pause before my mother replied. "Patricia has expressed concerns about family tension overshadowing the ceremony. Apparently, Laura mentioned some disagreements between you two." "Disagreements? You mean me occasionally asking questions about where my money is going?" "Honey, no one is denying your generosity," my mother said in that placating tone I'd grown to hate. "But this isn't about the money. It's about Laura's special day." "Then explain to me exactly why I'm being uninvited to a wedding I'm paying for," I demanded. Another pause, longer this time. "James's parents spoke with Laura yesterday. They're willing to contribute $50,000 toward the wedding expenses, but they were concerned about what they called family dysfunction. Apparently, Laura told them you've been having episodes." "Episodes?" I repeated, my blood running cold. "What does that mean?" My mother's voice dropped to a whisper. "She may have implied that you've been struggling with some mental health issues, that your success has come with a toll, and you've been taking it out on her." The bathroom stall seemed to spin around me. My sister hadn't just excluded me or taken advantage of my generosity, she'd actively painted me as mentally unstable to justify cutting me out. "Did you defend me?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Madison, try to understand. This wedding is everything to Laura. James comes from a very traditional family. They value stability and appearances. And what about honesty? What about basic human decency? Does Laura value those things at all?" "Of course she does," my mother insisted. She's just under a lot of pressure right now. Once the wedding is over, you two can work through this." A clarity I'd never experienced before washed over me. For years I'd been the family fixer, the responsible one, the bank account with no boundaries. I told myself it was love, but in that moment, I recognized it for what it truly was: exploitation. "Mom," I said with unnatural calm, "please tell Laura that if I'm not welcome at the wedding, then neither is my money." "Madison, don't be vindictive." "I'm not being vindictive. I'm establishing a boundary that should have existed all along." My voice grew stronger with each word. "If James's parents are contributing $50,000 with the condition that I'm not there, they can contribute the other $100,000 I've already spent too." "You can't do that." My mother gasped. "Everything's paid for. The wedding is in 3 days. Actually, most vendors have policies about final payments and cancellations. I should know, I've read all the contracts." "Madison, please. Tell Laura she has a choice. Either I'm at the wedding as an honored guest who made her day possible, or she can scramble to replace the funding I'm about to withdraw." I ended the call and sat in the bathroom stall for several minutes, my heart pounding, but my mind strangely clear. Then I returned to the conference room, apologized to my colleagues, and finished my presentation with mechanical precision. No one would have guessed that inside, I was simultaneously shattered and reborn. As soon as the meeting ended, I requested an emergency personal day for tomorrow, and went straight home to execute the most difficult and necessary decision of my adult life. I'm not normally a vindictive person. Throughout my life, I've been the peacemaker, the one who forgives quickly and moves on. But some betrayals cut too deep for simple forgiveness, especially when the offending parties show no remorse. This wasn't about revenge, it was about self-respect and consequences. Once home, I spread all the wedding documentation across my dining table. Contracts, receipts, email confirmations, payment schedules. Everything had been meticulously organized in both physical folders and digital files. I created 3 lists: vendors with final payments pending, services that could be canceled with partial refunds, and payments that were non-refundable. My phone continued buzzing with messages from my family, which I ignored. This required focus and precision. I started with the venue, the Griffin Estate. Their contract had a clause allowing for cancellation with a partial refund, if done more than 72 hours before the event. I called the event coordinator, Susan, with whom I'd been working closely for months. "Madison, what can I help you with?" "Getting excited for Saturday," Susan chirped. "Actually, Susan, I need to discuss cancellation options." A long pause. "Cancellation? Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "No, it's not. I've been funding this entire wedding for my sister, but I've just been informed that I'm not welcome to attend. Under the circumstances, I can no longer financially support the event." To her credit, Susan didn't pry further. "I understand. This must be incredibly difficult." She explained my options professionally. I could cancel entirely and receive a 25% refund of my deposit, or I could transfer the reservation to another paying party. "Please cancel and process the refund," I said firmly. "If my sister or her fiancé contacts you about reinstating the reservation, they're welcome to do so under their own financial responsibility." Next came the caterer, the photographer, the florist, the rental company, the bartending service, and a dozen other vendors. Some conversations were brief and businesslike. Others were awkwardly sympathetic. Word apparently traveled fast in the wedding industry, and by my call, vendors were already aware of the situation. "I heard what happened," the photographer said quietly. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. No one should be treated that way by family." The DJ was even more direct. "Man, that's cold. Your sister sounds like a piece of work, no offense." I offered no details beyond the essential facts, but it was clear that most vendors had encountered similar situations before. Several even offered more generous refund terms than their contract specified, citing unusual circumstances. By early evening, I'd processed cancellations for every service I'd booked and paid for. Where refunds were possible, I provided my banking details. Where money was lost, I accepted it as the price of my freedom from family dynamics. The last step was digital. I logged into the wedding planning website I'd created and downloaded all documents for my records, then deleted the entire site. I removed the shared online folders containing vendor information, seating charts, timelines, and the 55 meticulously created planning files that had consumed countless hours of my time over the past months. Just as I finished, my phone rang. Laura. After sending all her calls to voicemail all day, I decided to answer this one. How could you do this to me? She screamed without preamble. The venue just called and said, everything's been canceled. My wedding is in 3 days. Correction? I said calmly. The wedding you uninvited me from was in 3 days. Now it's your problem to solve. You vindictive bitch. Laura was sobbing now. You're ruining my life because of your jealousy. Mom was right. You are having a mental breakdown. Actually, I'm seeing things clearly for the time, I replied. You and our parents have taken advantage of me for years. This was just the final straw. James's parents are going to think we're a family of lunatics. How am I supposed to explain this? You could try telling the truth for once. Tell them how you lied about my mental health to exclude me from the wedding I paid for. Tell them how you've been presenting yourself as a successful businesswoman while living off my generosity. I never asked you to pay for everything. You offered, and you accepted enthusiastically and repeatedly. Then you excluded, belittled, and lied about me. I'm calling Mom, she threatened. Dad says we can sue you for this. I couldn't help but laugh. Sue me for what? Canceling services I paid for? Good luck with that. This isn't over, Laura hissed before hanging up. She was right about that, but not in the way she meant. Within minutes, my parents called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to my father's outraged message, threatening legal action, and my mother's tearful plea to reconsider before it's too late. I sent a single text to our family group chat, then pay for it yourselves, leeches. I'm done being your ATM. Then I blocked all their numbers, poured myself a glass of wine, and began researching remote cabins for a week of solitude. I needed space to process what had happened, and to begin the difficult journey of rebuilding my sense of self-worth without the familiar weight of family obligation. As I booked a peaceful lakeside cabin in the Olympic Peninsula, I felt simultaneously hollow and liberated. The family I thought I had was gone, or perhaps had never existed as I'd imagined. But for the time in my adult life, I was putting myself, and there was a certain power in that realization. The Olympic Peninsula in early autumn is a study in contradictions, vibrant colors against gray skies, crashing waves alongside silent forests, endings and beginnings coexisting in perfect harmony. For 7 days I walked miles of deserted beaches, hiked through ancient rainforests, and sat for hours watching eagles soar above the Pacific. My cabin had spotty cell service and no Wi-Fi, a blessing that forced me to disconnect not just from my family drama, but from the constant demands of the digital world. I'd left my work laptop at home, but brought a journal, filling pages with raw, unfiltered thoughts about my family, my patterns of people-pleasing, and the vision for my life moving forward. Without the endless interruptions of texts, calls, and emails, clarity came more easily than I expected. By the day, I understood that what hurt most wasn't the money, though nearly $100,000 was certainly significant. What cut deepest was the casual cruelty with which my sister and parents had dismissed my feelings while expecting unlimited access to my resources. The realization that I'd been valued primarily as a solution to problems, rather than as a person with needs of my own. On what would have been Laura's wedding day, I hiked to a remote waterfall and performed a small, private ritual of release. I wrote down every hurtful comment, every manipulative tactic, every moment of being taken for granted, then tore the pages into tiny pieces and scattered them into the rushing water. It was theatrical perhaps, but watching those fragments disappear into the current felt powerfully symbolic. When I returned to Seattle and civilization, reality crashed back in waves. Came the social media fallout. Laura had posted a tear-streaked selfie on Instagram with a long caption about family betrayal and having to scramble to salvage our special day. Our mother shared a vague Facebook post, asking for prayers during a difficult family time. Extended family members and mutual friends chose sides without knowing the full story, many assuming I'd acted out of jealousy or mental instability as Laura had suggested. I didn't dignify any of it with a response. The people who truly knew me reached out directly, offering support without judgment. My closest friend, Taylor, came over my night back with takeout and wine, letting me vent for hours without once checking her phone. My colleague, Jonathan, who'd witnessed my hasty exit from the product meeting, invited me to dinner with his husband, creating space for normal conversation that didn't revolve around my family drama. Through these friends, I learned bits and pieces about the wedding that ultimately took place. Laura and James had indeed gotten married, but at his parents' country club, rather than the Griffin estate. The guest list had been cut in half, the elaborate floral arrangements replaced by simple centerpieces, the gourmet menu downgraded to standard country club fare. Patricia had apparently stepped in with some additional funding, but nowhere near what I'd been providing. The whole thing felt rushed and tense, reported my cousin Rachel, who'd attended as a bridesmaid. Laura was snapping at everyone, James kept disappearing for important calls, and your parents looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. According to Rachel, my absence had been explained as a medical emergency vague enough to avoid questions, but specific enough to paint me as unstable. No mention was made of my financial contributions or the last-minute venue change. The narrative was completely controlled to portray Laura as the victim of unfortunate circumstances rather than the architect of her own wedding disaster. 2 weeks after my return, my mother began reaching out again, with guilt-laden texts, then with increasingly desperate voicemails. I unblocked her number, but maintained my distance, responding only with brief acknowledgments that I was alive and well. My father, true to form, communicated through her rather than reaching out directly. "Your father and I think we all need to sit down as a family," she said in one message. "Laura's back from her honeymoon, and there are things that need to be discussed." I replied with this single sentence, "I'm not ready for that conversation yet." The truth was, I was deep in the process of examining our family dynamics with my newly found therapist, Dr. Chin. After just 3 sessions, patterns that had been invisible to me for years suddenly came into sharp focus. How Laura's role as the family princess had been established early and reinforced consistently. How my parents had outsourced their parental responsibilities to me while giving Laura endless chances. How my financial success had been weaponized against me as an obligation, rather than celebrated as an achievement. Families develop roles for each member, Dr. Chin explained during one particularly illuminating session. You were assigned the role of capable caretaker, while your sister was assigned the role of needing care. These roles served your parents' emotional needs in some way, which is why they've worked so hard to maintain them despite how harmful they've been to you. As autumn deepened into winter, the holiday season loomed with its particular brand of family expectations. For the time in my adult life, I declined my parents' invitation for Thanksgiving, choosing instead to volunteer at a community dinner for tech industry newcomers far from their families. Christmas brought more pressure, with daily calls from my mother insisting that family should be together, regardless of disagreements. I held firm, sending gifts but maintaining my physical and emotional distance. Instead of the traditional Russell family Christmas, I joined Taylor's family celebration, where I was treated with warmth and respect without any undercurrents of obligation or resentment. The most surprising development came in January, when several extended family members reached out independently to share their own experiences with Laura's entitlement. My cousin Michael confessed that she'd borrowed $5,000 from him 2 years ago, with vague promises of repayment that never materialized. Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, not to be confused with James's mother, revealed that Laura had lived with her rent-free for 6 months after college while claiming to my parents that she was paying market rate. I never said anything because I didn't want to cause family drama, and Patricia admitted over coffee. But after seeing how they've treated you, I regret staying silent. There's a pattern here that goes beyond normal sibling rivalry. Learning that others had experienced similar treatment was both validating and heartbreaking. The family mythology of Laura as the fragile princess and me as the invulnerable achiever had affected more relationships than just ours. It had created ripples of dysfunction throughout our extended family, silencing those who might have spoken up earlier out of the same conflict avoidance that had kept me paying wedding bills long after red flags began appearing. By spring, I had established a new normal. Weekly therapy sessions, a small but supportive circle of friends, limited contact with my parents, and no direct communication with Laura or James. I'd redirected my financial generosity toward causes that mattered to me: a coding scholarship for girls from low-income backgrounds, a monthly donation to the Rainforest Preservation Organization, whose land I'd found healing during my Olympic Peninsula retreat. Boundaries aren't punishments, Dr. Chin reminded me during a session where I expressed guilt about limiting contact with my parents. They're structures that allow relationships to exist in healthier ways. Your family can choose to respect those boundaries or not, but that choice is theirs, not yours. Slowly, painfully, I was learning that lesson, that I could only control my own actions, not others' responses to them. That my worth existed independently of what I could provide for others. That real love didn't come with invoices or conditions. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, I was no longer drowning in anger or hurt. Instead, I was navigating the unfamiliar but liberating waters of self-respect, one boundary at a time. They say time heals all wounds, but that's not entirely true. Time provides distance, perspective, context, but healing requires active work and conscious choices. In the year following Laura's wedding, I discovered that healing isn't a destination, but a winding path with unexpected turns, occasional backsliding, and moments of breakthrough when you least expect them. The significant milestone came 8 months after the wedding debacle, when I finally agreed to meet my mother for coffee. We chose a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes, and set a firm 1-hour time limit. Dr. Chen had helped me prepare with role-playing exercises and boundary-setting language, but my stomach still churned with anxiety as I spotted my mother already seated by the window. She looked older, somehow, more fragile. Part of me wanted to immediately slip back into caretaker mode to smooth away her worry lines and assure her everything was fine. But that pattern was exactly what had led us here. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, hands wrapped tightly around her mug. "I've missed you so much." "I've missed aspects of our relationship too," I replied carefully. But I needed this time apart. What followed was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. For the time, my mother actually listened as I explained how the family dynamics had affected me, how Laura's wedding had merely been the breaking point of a lifelong pattern. "I always thought we were doing the right thing," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "Laura needed more support, and you were so capable, so independent. I never considered that we were burdening you or taking you for granted." "Intent doesn't erase impact, Mom," I replied, a phrase Dr. Chen had taught me. "You and Dad may not have intended to create this imbalance, but the effect was real." And when I finally tried to establish boundaries, the family narrative became that I was having a mental breakdown. My mother looked down, ashamed. Laura was so afraid of losing James. His family is very image-conscious, and she thought if there was any hint of family conflict. So she lied about me. "And you and Dad supported that lie. We didn't know how to navigate it," she admitted. "Everything was happening so fast, and Laura was so distraught. We made the wrong choice, and I'm truly sorry for that." It wasn't a perfect apology. There were still hints of justification in her explanation, but it was more acknowledgement than I'd ever received before. We agreed to continue meeting occasionally, with the understanding that certain topics remained off-limits, and that my relationship with Laura would develop on its own timeline, if at all. My father proved more resistant to change. When we eventually met for lunch, his approach was to act as if nothing significant had happened. "Your mother says you're doing well at work," he began, bypassing any mention of the past year of estrangement. When I gently but firmly steered the conversation toward the necessary topics, he grew defensive. "Families have disagreements all the time, Madison. At some point, you need to let this go and move forward." "Moving forward requires acknowledgement of what happened," I countered. This wasn't a simple disagreement. This was a pattern of behavior that culminated in me being labeled mentally unstable and excluded from an event I paid for. He shifted uncomfortably. "Laura was under tremendous pressure." "We all were," I interrupted. "The difference is how we chose to handle that pressure. Our relationship remains strained, but civil. I accepted that my father might never fully understand my perspective or acknowledge his role in the family dynamics. That acceptance, painful as it was, represented its own form of growth, recognizing that I couldn't change others, only how I responded to them. As for Laura and James, their perfect fairy tale showed cracks almost immediately. Through the family grapevine, I learned they'd separated briefly just 4 months after the wedding. James had apparently expected Laura to integrate seamlessly into his upper-class world, while Laura had expected marriage to bring financial security without the need for actual work. Neither expectation had been met. They reconciled after a month apart, but rumors of tension persisted. James's family had not embraced Laura as she'd hoped, and the lifestyle she'd anticipated, charity galas and summer homes, came with social expectations and obligations she wasn't prepared for. I took no pleasure in their struggles. Despite everything, Laura was still my sister, and some part of me would always care about her well-being. But I also recognized that their relationship problems weren't my responsibility to fix, a realization that would have been impossible for me to reach a year earlier. Then, 11 months after the wedding, a letter arrived at my condo. I recognized Laura's handwriting immediately on the pale blue envelope. For several minutes I just held it, unsure whether opening it would be an act of self-care or self-sabotage. Finally, curiosity won out. Inside was a card with a simple message: "I owe you an apology. Can we talk?" No excuses, no blame shifting, no emotional manipulation, just a straightforward acknowledgement and request. After consulting with Dr. Chin, I responded with equal simplicity: "I'm open to that. Coffee next Tuesday at 3. The Laura who met me at the cafe bore little resemblance to the entitled bride who had thrown me out of her wedding. Her designer clothes had been replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. The carefully highlighted hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. Even her makeup was subdued, revealing freckles I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. "James and I are separating," she said after we'd ordered. "For real, this time. The divorce papers are being drafted." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied and meant it. "Don't be. It's the right decision." She took a deep breath. Being married to James made me see myself through his family's eyes, and I didn't like what I saw. Shallow, materialistic, willing to hurt people who love me to maintain appearances. That's a painful realization. It is. But necessary. She met my eyes directly. "Madison, what I did to you was unforgivable. The wedding, the lies about your mental health, taking advantage of your generosity for years, all of it. I wouldn't blame you if you never wanted to speak to me again." "Then why are we having coffee?" I asked gently. "Because I need to take responsibility for my actions. No excuses." Her hands trembled slightly as she continued. "I was so focused on creating the perfect image that I destroyed the most important relationship in my life. I don't expect forgiveness or reconciliation. I just need you to know that I recognize what I did, I deeply regret it, and I'm working to become someone who would never treat anyone that way again." The conversation that followed was raw, honest, and occasionally tearful. Laura spoke of her therapy journey. Her realization that she'd been playing the role of princess for so long she'd lost sight of her authentic self. How James's world had initially seemed like the perfect extension of that role, until the constant judgment and performance became suffocating. "I'm starting over," she explained. "Moving back to Portland, getting a teaching credential like I originally wanted before I got caught up in trying to be Instagram famous. Building a life based on what actually matters to me, not what impresses others. I didn't promise immediate reconciliation, or a return to our former relationship. Too much had happened for such simple resolution. But I did offer what felt authentic in the moment. I appreciate your apology, and I'm open to slowly rebuilding some form of relationship if your actions consistently match your words." That coffee meeting didn't magically heal all wounds or instantly restore our sisterhood, but it planted a seed of possibility that has slowly, cautiously grown in the months since. We text occasionally now, sharing small moments rather than grand declarations. I sent her information about the teaching program I'd researched. She sent me a funny meme that reminded her of our childhood. As for me, the experience of being the uninvited sister transformed my approach to relationships of all kinds. I became more discerning about where I invested my time, energy, and yes, money. I developed a healthy skepticism toward those who approached me with immediate needs but no interest in my well-being. Most importantly, I learned that walking away from toxic dynamics isn't selfish. It's often the most loving choice you can make, both for yourself and for those who need to face the consequences of their actions. 6 months ago, I began dating someone, a kind, thoughtful software engineer named Brian, who appreciates my generosity without exploiting it. When I cautiously shared my family history, his response was anger on my behalf rather than judgment of my boundaries. "They're lucky you're even considering letting them back into your life," he said, squeezing my hand. That simple validation meant everything. Confirmation that my experience was as egregious as I'd felt it to be, not an overreaction as my family had initially framed it. The money I lost on Laura's wedding is long gone, and I've made peace with that. The emotional toll lasted longer, but the personal growth that emerged from that painful period has been invaluable. I've discovered strength I never knew I had. boundaries I never thought I deserved to set, and a version of myself that no longer needs external validation to feel worthy. If you're watching this and recognizing similar patterns in your own family dynamics, please know that you're not alone. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and others, is to step back and let natural consequences unfold. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for authentic relationships to flourish. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? What helped you through that process? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more content about navigating complex family relationships and personal growth. Thank you for listening to my journey from doormat to dignity. I'm grateful for each of you who took the time to hear my story.